The defeat of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War created an unexpected crisis for the British government. In its aftermath, a distant geopolitical settlement triggered the most significant challenge to British authority in India in over 60 years. Throughout the conflict, the British Empire relied heavily on Indian blood and resources. Millions of Indian soldiers served in foreign trenches, sustaining the imperial war effort at a massive human cost. When the war concluded, Indian Muslims mobilized to demand that the British government protect the position of the Ottoman Sultan as the Caliph, the spiritual head of Islam. This Khilafat movement was a direct confrontation over the post-war global order. It used the religious status of the Caliphate as a focal point to contest British imperial power. Mahatma Gandhi saw this religious defense as a bridge to a unified front. He believed that by supporting the Khilafat cause, he could align Muslim grievances with the broader Indian struggle for self-rule. The events of 1920 were not an isolated eruption. They were the result of several compounding economic, political, and social vectors from 1919 that left India ready for a massive uprising. The first vector in this movement was the severe economic distress that followed the armistice. This chart shows how a surge in foreign imports led directly to the closure of local Indian factories. As production slowed, the price of basic commodities rose, creating a period of rapid inflation. The impact reached deep into the rural population. Peasants, already struggling with the increased cost of living, faced higher rents and punishing colonial taxes. Alongside economic ruin came the second vector, political betrayal. In 1919, the British introduced the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. Nationalists had expected these reforms to grant India meaningful self-governance in return for its wartime support. Instead, the legislation kept ultimate executive power in British hands, leading to deep disillusionment across the political spectrum. Fearing revolutionary activity, the British introduced the Rowlatt Act. This flowchart shows its legal mechanism, allowing the government to imprison people without trial. In response, Gandhi launched the Rowlatt Satyagraha. This map shows general strikes and demonstrations spreading nationwide, defying the law. By late 1919, the overlap of economic hardship and legal oppression meant that diverse segments of Indian society, from urban laborers to rural peasants, now shared a collective interest in confronting the government. The fourth vector was state violence, and the center of that violence was the Punjab region. The arrest of two local nationalist leaders, Satyapal Singh and Saifuddin Kichlu, led to widespread public protests in the city of Amritsar. In an effort to crush these unarmed gatherings, General Dyer assumed command and ordered a violent escalation. On April 13, 1919, his troops fired directly into a trapped crowd at Jallianwala Bagh. These bullet marks on the brickwork are the surviving evidence of a massacre that left hundreds dead and thousands injured. The subsequent investigation by the Hunter Commission further angered the public. Despite the loss of life, the commission essentially cleared General Dyer of wrongdoing, granting him what nationalists called a clean chit. This refusal to hold Dyer accountable broke the final psychological link between the Indian public and the supposed moral authority of the British Empire. As domestic trust collapsed, the focus shifted to a final international vector, the post-war fate of the Ottoman Empire. Under the 1920 Treaty of Sevres, the British dismantled the Ottoman Empire. This map illustrates Turkey's massive territorial losses. The British also dismissed the Khalifa, an act Muslims in India saw as a direct insult to their religious identity and a clear sign of hostility. The Khilafat movement made two core demands. First, that the Khalifa must maintain control over the holy sites of Islam. Second, that he be left with enough territory after the war to remain a viable political and spiritual authority. Because the British were the ones stripping the Khalifa of his land and his titles, Indian nationalists saw the struggle in Turkey as another front in their own battle for sovereignty. To many Indians, defending the Sultan was no longer just a religious grievance. It was a way to resist a global empire that seemed intent on dismantling every power but its own. The organizational foundation for this resistance began in the commercial centers of Bombay, where the first Khilafat Committee was formed in early 1919. The movement's leadership included figures like the Ali brothers, Muhammad and Shaukat, as well as intellectuals like Abul Kalam Azad and Hasrat Mohani. The committee initially focused on moderate petitions and meetings, led by wealthy businessmen. However, a more militant faction soon took control, arguing that only a mass national movement would force the British to listen. At the All India Khilafat Conference in November 1919, the movement took a decisive step. Leaders like Hasrat Mohani began calling for a total boycott of British goods. By April 1920, Shaukat Ali warned the British that if their demands were not met, the Khilafat leaders would join Gandhi in a nationwide movement of non-cooperation. The Khilafat leadership then officially invited Mahatma Gandhi to serve as the unifying head of the joint movement, bridging the gap between the two major communities. In May 1920, the British published both the harsh terms of the Treaty of Sèvres and the Hunter Committee report on the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. The simultaneous arrival of these two documents proved that neither religious nor civil rights were safe under British rule. In June, the Central Khilafat Committee met in Allahabad and adopted a full program of non-cooperation. This strategy focused on three pillars: returning government honors, resigning from the civil service and the military, and refusing to pay taxes. While the Indian National Congress was initially hesitant to adopt such a radical path, the scale of public anger eventually moved the organization toward action. Congress recognized that the Khilafat issue offered a rare chance to build a lasting coalition between Hindus and Muslims. The Muslim League followed suit, pledging its full potential to support the Congress-led agitation. By the end of 1920, domestic outrage over state violence and geopolitical anger over the Caliphate had fused into a single, massive non-cooperation movement under Gandhi's leadership. This alliance expanded the nationalist cause to segments of the population that had never been involved before, including urban laborers, students, and rural artisans. It also marked the large-scale involvement of women in public political life. This photo from the period captures the politicization of everyday life as the movement reached into the marketplaces of India. The Khilafat movement eventually faded, not because the British defeated it, but because of political changes within Turkey itself. In a final irony, the Turkish leader Mustafa Kemal Pasha introduced secular reforms that abolished the caliphate entirely, removing the movement's primary reason for existence. Although its specific religious goal was lost, the movement's true legacy was the creation of a unified, mass-based coalition that permanently changed the nature of the Indian freedom struggle.